So welcome and thank you for joining our live stream today. I'm Joe, I'm the director of Good Law Project, and I'm really excited to be joined here by scholar and activist Joanna Kuciak. In 2021, she was one of the spokespeople of Berlin's successful referendum campaign to expropriate stock-listed landlords called, and Joanna, please don't make me humiliate myself by pronouncing it, called...
So the campaign is called Deutsche Wohnen and Co. enteignen, which means expropriate Deutsche Wohnen and Co., which Deutsche Wohnen is the name of the biggest corporate landlord in Berlin. Now they merged with another corporate landlord, Vonovia, and they own well over 100,000 apartments in Berlin. So this is the scale. And all these corporate landlords together, they own 240,000 apartments. Most of them used to be public housing.
And she's gone on to publish just last week an award-winning book about the story of the grassroots movement that convinced 1 million Berliners to pop the speculative housing bubble. It's called Radically Legal. I loved it because of its message of hope, but I also loved it because of its scholarship. There's a section where you quote some of what Hitler said when he became chancellor, but there's also this wonderful extract from Jürgen Habermas. The super rich communicate through money. Jürgen Habermas calls money a steering medium of the contemporary economy, a communicative tool that coordinates the interest-based action of economic agents without the need for language-based conversation. Money has the properties of a code by means of which information can be transmitted from sender to receiver. Because such communication is delinguistified and uprooted from the social context, it's also sheltered from political questioning of deliberative democracy. Before we get into the Q&A, I want to invite anyone listening or watching to share any questions you have in the comments. The Good Law Project team will be looking in the reply tweets or the comments on Instagram or whatever platform you're using to watch this live stream. We'll be looking out for them, we'll capture them, and at the end of the session, if there's time, I'll put them to Joanna. And thanks to everyone who's submitted questions already. Joanna, it's hard to encapsulate your work. It spans academia, on-the-ground organising, campaigning. How would you describe yourself?
Well, I mean, I describe myself often as a scholar activist, although, to be fair, I mean, it's a description that was first attached to me. I mean, I grew up in Poland in the time of the Solidarity movement. And so from my first education, both while growing up and during my university studies, where most of my professors used to be engaged in the Solidarność movement, to be honest, it was taken for granted that being involved in reality is part of being an intellectual. There was this ethos of intelligentsia, of public intellectuals. So this label scholar activist is something that was attached to me once I was in the West. Like at home, it was just being an intellectual. Like you have to be engaged. Like that thinking and writing was considered a form of public service, and I still see it that way.
And is that still true in Poland now? Is it a necessary corollary of being an intellectual in Poland today that you also be an activist?
I'm definitely not anymore. I mean, not in this way. Although, I mean, there is still this thread. There is still a tradition of academics getting involved with having impact on reality, but not to the extent as it used to be. Obviously, it was also a function of this intense political transformation. I mean, first, the fight for freedom in many different ways, and then getting all hands on board with the transformation of the system. Obviously, also a lot has gone wrong in this respect then, right? I mean, there were many intellectuals that, abandoned, in a way, the impartiality and really got carried away, let's say, with interest, that there was some, getting involved in corruption. So this obviously like a fine line that but what was interesting, and I speak to it also in the book, even if I look at this biographies of Solidarność intellectuals, like usually the ones who really gave up this ethos were the ones that pretend to be neutral experts. And I think that's the difference, right, with the scholar activists, because I think there's no such thing as being completely neutral. I mean, obviously, and I mean, science doesn't confirm it. I mean, we bring our feelings, we bring our values to whatever we are doing. And so the best you can do is to carry your values openly, to say, what are you engaging for? And that's what I have been persistently doing in my scholarship. I only engage in intellectual projects that I consider important and also politically important. I mean, they are about the vision of democracy, social justice. And in this way, I do not pretend I'm a neutral expert, because I don't think that being engaged in democracy and the ability of human beings to thrive is a neutral thing. It has never been.
Yeah, and that notion of wearing one's politics openly, as scholar activists do, or hiding them away, as scholar non-activists do, is also present, isn't it? Both in that quote from Habermas that I read out a couple of minutes ago, and also in how Good Law Project talks about the law. So the book, Radically Legal Berlin Constitutes the Future, is about the housing market in Berlin. So just for those who don't know the housing market in Berlin, how does it differ, or how did it differ from the UK?
Just maybe start from the basic, like what happened actually, what the movement has achieved so far. So in September 2021, we won a referendum in which 1 million people, or 60% of voters, said yes to expropriation and socializations. These are two legal terms I explain in a moment, of housing that belongs to these corporate landlords. So to say it in a plain language, I mean, there's this big amount of housing that used to be public housing, was built with public funding, that was privatized, very cheaply sold off in the 2000s. And unlike in UK, where the Thatcherist privatization was about selling this housing to sitting tenants, in Germany, the big portfolio of housing were sold to private equity funds or to stock-listed corporations. So housing was privatized, but also transferred to financial markets at the same time, which is a different phenomena, because the function of financial market, the function of a stock-listed corporation, is to provide profit for shareholders. So even if these companies, corporations appear to be operating on the housing market, in reality, they're only loyal to the financial markets. Their loyalty is to shareholders, and they use housing instrumentally to extract as much value of it as possible, which is why they neglect maintenance, they push the rents up. And they also go on an offensive of trying to go around existing rental regulations, which now we're coming to the difference between UK and Germany, because Germany has a long tradition of rent control in many different forms. So there are two different systems. I think the first big difference is the system is still very much oriented at rental. I mean, Berlin, 85% apartments are rental housing, so which means everyone rents. I mean, independently of the social status. I mean, all social classes, all groups, which also creates this housing is a political cause that spans across political divisions. And this housing, historically, this housing system was established with affordable rent for three functions. I mean, the first function was political. And it comes very much to the idea that having a place of one's own, having a stable way of living, is an important part of developing freedom. That in order to develop our full potential as human beings, we do need a place of privacy that is safe and secure and stable. So there is this very, Kantian idea that housing rights are also freedom rights. They're not just social rights, but they're freedom rights.
And just interrupting you there briefly, that was baked in to how the housing market in Berlin was rethought after the Second World War. I mean, this is kind of quite radical stuff for an Englishman. The notion that the housing might serve some purpose for the greater good.
Yeah. Already earlier, already after the German Revolution and between the First War and the Second War. I mean, the first housing crisis was between the First and the Second World War, and that's also where this tradition of Bauhaus, for example, and very good quality, affordable housing for everyone, as a political project, as a freedom project, also came about. Then there is a tradition of social rights on top of this freedom rights, and that also dates back actually to the Kingdom of Prussia. I mean, the first rent control regulations date back to the Kingdom of Prussia and actually came from Bismarck times. But there is this idea that, to balance out certain social inequalities. And last but not least, and in some ways maybe that's the most interesting point, because few people think about it this way, especially after the war in the times of German economic miracle, keeping housing affordable was part of Germany's economic policy. And the idea was simple, that if we keep rents affordable, then the German industry can keep salaries relatively low while having good quality of living for the workers, and therefore you can keep the export prices low. And that's how. I think it's legitimate to say that Germany built itself as this export giant also through cheap, affordable housing. It was built in this policy. So it was always clear that affordable housing is good for the economy.
And you started to tell us, you've told us something about the principles on which the housing in Berlin was constructed. Perhaps you could just describe what the process of, or at least the process of the privatization of this housing stock has meant. How has it changed from what was to what is?
Of privatization. Yes. So the privatization, was part of the 1990s, 2000s push for neoliberal austerity, right? It was part of this big sellouts of public property that happened in many places, in Britain too. But again, as I said, in the German case, it was privatization and financialization combined. And so the history of this article dates back to the German Revolution, again, 1918, 1919. It was written in slightly different form into a Weimar Constitution. And the big two ideas behind is, on the one hand, the idea of economic democracy, that the power, democracy is all about sharing power, right? And that this power sharing should also be realized when it comes to economic power. And then it was empowered. It was extra empowered in 1949, where Germany was writing its new constitution after the tragedy of Second World War and Nazism. And it's a very interesting historical moment because, you have this room full of lawmakers sitting on the rubble, knowing everything about how wrong it can get, and trying to do all their best to prevent it, and trying to put checks and balance to make sure this would historically never happen. And among the consideration, they very freshly had in mind the role of big industry in supporting Hitler in coming to power, and how this economic power can be misused against democracy. It was very evident in 1949, because the big industry worked with Hitler to destroy the trade unions, to make sure, and to destroy parliamentary democracy. I quoted in the book. It's a quite strong quotes, and I think also not everyone knows about it. But in Germany in 1949, everyone knew about it. So the idea was, legally very innovative, I think, to extend the democratic checks and balance onto the area of economy and of economic power. I mean, this expression, misuse of economic power, was very prominent. And what I find interesting is, of course, in 1949, I mean, this was still very much bound in the national perspective, I mean, national industry misusing the power. But of course, with globalization, the notion of misuse of economic power against democracy has completely different meaning. And of course, we see it with these big corporations who are actively undermining the democratic decisions or the power, the regulatory power of the state. So so it's an interesting legal clause. I mean, it's almost like some tool that was left there in the Constitution, completely forgotten, and all of a sudden, a group of activists, a group of ordinary citizens, just rediscovers it and reclaims its power to take back our homes.
I mean, it's it is. I mean, the book rather says this in its title, but it is pretty extraordinary stuff. The idea that we might have a constitution and that its architects recognize the ill to which money, capitalism can be put, and give the people the right to trump money, a very specific legal right in the Constitution. Because when you expropriate the housing stock, I mean, do you expropriate at market value, or does something else happen?
No, because the whole idea is that you withdraw, and you cannot do it with any resource. I mean, these are the certain categories, right? Land being prominently among them, and I mean, the other thing that's now prominently looking at, I think, by some ecological movement, because it's also natural resources.
Yeah.
So that certain categories of goods, assets could and should be withdrawn from this logic of the market. So it's recognizing that certain assets are really crucial for the common good, and they should not be treated as a commodity. And you can, and also what is important, you can only do it as a mass scale. I mean, the purpose is transformation of the whole sector, withdrawing a sector from this logic of the market towards the logic of common good. And what is also equally important, it is not nationalization. It is not just about turning into state property, because the component of democratic management is as important as the component of public ownership. So again, it's very innovative stuff, because already back then, this clause recognized that, I mean, what we know, I think very well by now, that both public and private entity can do terrible job and at managing. And it's not that just by having private ownership or public ownership, you guarantee that things are going to be well managed. So the idea is to really also give power to the people to manage this resource in a participatory, democratic way, to really decide and have a stake in the system. So it is again, just to say it again stronger, it is a very early idea of a proper sharing economy, but the sharing economy that is really sharing and not just extracting under the disguise of sharing.
And you don't have to pay full market value.
No, exactly. So the law says, I mean, obviously the law is, as you know very well, subject to interpretation. But one thing that emerges that is very clear is that there need to be a compensation. So it's not that you just take away with no compensation. There has to be compensation, and it has to be below market value, because if it's market value, then it's purchase. It's not socialization, and it's not then withdrawing it from the logic of the market. If you pay market value, it's pretty much the logic of the market. Legally, this means that such compensation is a political decision, and it could be anything between €1 and €1 below the market value, right? And it depends very much on the pressure. And I'm sure as soon as it's going to happen, of course, this decision will be taken to the court. And I mean, you know how things work with the law. So they're going to be lawsuits, and they're going to be, the actual amount of compensation will be figured out in this process. But it has to be below market value.
And how do you? Oh, I could ask how theoretically one exercises the right, but why didn't instead you tell me what you and your movement did?
So when this clause was first again rediscovered, because it was always there in the Constitution, it was an interesting instance because there's no legal precedence. No one has ever done it before. So it was unclear if we can use it, how we can use it. And to be honest, like the lawyers were very skeptical at first. Some even call it an obsolete clause, thinking, oh, maybe if it hasn't been used, it's not valid anymore. But then we thought like, yeah, but can an article of a constitution just go off or expire? Like, is it like an old piece of cheese you forgot in the fridge and like it got moldy? I mean, like, yeah, it seems like it has a status of a fundamental right. So you would think they shouldn't lose value over time, right? So there was that, and then there was the political question, like, okay, it's legally possible, but will we ever get majority for it? I mean, it's obviously that the government is not going to spontaneously legislate it, because the government in power in Berlin there was very much in the pockets of at least the ruling party. I mean, they made deals there for their campaigns funded by real estate lobbies. Then as soon as this got in the media and there was a certain already certain group of people, visible group of behind it, then different political parties and think tanks started ordering legal expertise to say like, shit, is it really possible? Like we also forgot about it. And one by one, it turns out these legal documents came, and pretty much all of them, I mean, but one or two, but that came from very conservative think tanks. It was almost like predictable that they will say no, but most of them said actually legally, of course it's possible. I mean, it is a fundamental right inscribed in the Constitution. I mean, you might not like it, but it's hard to dismiss it and pretend it is not there.
It's written there.
Exactly. I mean, and then, so as soon as you had it, that also gave people the confidence that this may actually happen, that it's not this kind of dreamy project, but something that is really anchored in the system, and it is a glimmer of hope. And I think with this double movement of law empowering politics and politics empowering law, like soon we arrived from, I mean, I describe it in the book, there's this moment, you know, there's this party that, you know, at least is an urban legend. It was a birthday party of one of the activists where people basically sat there and started talking, okay, how could we do it? And even many radical people, activists themselves, they were like, yeah, let's do it, but it's not going to work. I mean, let's be realistic. To the election evening of our referendum, where one of our spokesperson went on television, and we were all waiting for the election results, and they weren't yet there. And so after this TV show, the representative from the lobby organization that was explicitly created by Real Estate Lobby to lobby against us approached our spokesperson and told him, like, look, I'm a realist, you will win. So we moved from a situation where even the radical people think it's impossible to the situation where Real Estate Lobby says, of course you will win it. So that's been quite a political move, you know, and it shows. I mean, I find it's interesting because it shows how much is possible in politics. That unless you try, and then you create this possibility by this systematic organization. But I think what is also particularly important is that it is anchored in the system. It's interesting form of revolution. I mean, this concept of radically legal, because in a way we used to think of revolution as something that, you know, smashes the old system and creates a new one. I think we're so far in the act of neoliberal and corporate distractions of the public system that used to be functioning, that actually the most revolutionary thing to do is to protect the system from being smashed by private equity, by the corporations sucking value out of it. So in a way, it's a very conservative revolution in that law is, I mean, it's a conservative thing. I mean, constitution is conservative in this very basic sense that it's a law that has been created a long time ago and it changes very slowly. It's extremely hard to change a constitution. And because it changes so slowly, it protected certain version of social democracy that the current politic really abandoned, current politics really abandoned. So this conservative power of the law turned out to be the most progressive things that we could leverage to
maybe you
to
can
change the system.
remake the Master's house using the Master's tools.
Yeah.
After all, and it's really interesting to me hearing that explanation, to think about how something that is so obvious, obviously right, that the basic human need for shelter should not be subordinated to capitalism, neoliberalism, that there ought to be safeguards against the interests of private equity landlords trumping the human need to have a roof over one's head. That those sorts of common sense propositions should nevertheless feel so radical, so outrageous, that even in this party in a left-wing Berlin squat, people were saying, nah, we can't. And it's written in the Constitution, right?
Yeah.
And even then people were thinking, nah, this is much too radical. This could never happen.
Well, I mean, but I think that's interesting because it shows us, and I think what I love about this movement is also that it takes the system seriously, and that I also compare it to a Solidarność movement, because what this movement does is take democracy and rule of law seriously and hold it to its promise. I mean, in the end, the rule of law is telling us that we're free and equal subjects. And in the end, democracy is telling us that the power belongs to the people. I mean, it's not the sentence in the German constitution, all state power derives from the people. I mean, democracy, Demokratis, like, is, the power of the people. And of course, as a population, we became very much cynical about it because the system is so obviously rigged. And it's not, that the system is rigged. I mean, it's not some conspiracy theory. We know it from mainstream academic research these days. We know it from Netflix movies. The Financial Times is writing about it, not the New Socialist, but the Financial Times is writing about how big corporations like structurally undermine electoral system in the United States, democracy, and I think there's nothing more dangerous to the rigged system than people who refuse to be cynical about it and who leverage this promise of the system against against this perversions of the system. And I think in the end, like, this movement takes democracy seriously and say, okay, this is a system where we can actually design how we govern ourselves together. And to be honest, like, also coming from this perspective, especially in relation to housing, I'm always astounded how in London, if I compare it to London or to UK, how little people expect from the system anymore. I mean, we're talking about socialization of big corporations, of landlords, but if you want to shock a Londoner, it's enough to say that most of the rental contract, or all a standard rental contract in Germany, is open-ended. It's not a lease you sign for a year. And the landlord needs to have a very good legally justified reason to raise the rent. They cannot do it every year as they please. And you do have a rent control. And if you have a black mold in the apartment, that it's illegal for a landlord not to remove it immediately, and so on and so on.
And you have a tenants union that can force the landlords to address the black mold if they're not inclined to voluntarily.
Exactly. So and that's just obvious for people in Germany, right? Like, it's the socialization is the next step. But again, like London, that there is another law in Germany that bans from keeping housing purposely empty. So what you see in Chelsea and Kensington in London, where in a situation of the housing crisis, you have the best quality housing being kept empty on purpose so that just someone can extract even more profit. This is also illegal. I mean, the law is called the ban against alienation from the purpose, that assumes that the purpose of the housing is to house people. And so the municipality can put tenants in a housing, and then these tenants pay rent, but the landlord cannot oppose to it, and this has been enforced in many instances in Berlin and in Hamburg. So there's plenty of this kind of regulations that are not even considered they're radical. They're just like part of the mainstream system. And yeah, so from this perspective, I'm always surprised how people in UK seems to have given up on this idea they can want certain things from the system, that the system is actually dares to want things.
Yeah. A proper challenge to us at Good Law Project, because it's quite difficult to listen to your description of what housing should do and the safeguards that should exist to ensure that it does, and push back against them as being antithetical to common sense or the public interest. They're not. They're clearly common sense and clearly in the public interest. Do you think there are other lessons that we in the United Kingdom can take from that campaign?
Well, I think, one lesson is definitely that you only learn how much power you have if you start from using the power that you already have, that you get empowered in the process of campaigning. So I think that's one important lesson. As I said, like at the beginning, even part of the activists didn't believe it's possible. But if you look into what power you have in the system, take it seriously, and go from there, then you end up gaining more and more power. So it's always good to aim high. I think the second very important lesson from the movement, I think it's a very impressive movement in that, it weaves together, going really across political boundaries. If you look at who voted for us, these were voters from all the political parties. The Conservative voters voted for us, the Social Democrats, the left, part of the right-wing populist AfD, they also, their voters vote, because if you're a human, you need housing, and just to really go down to this basic need. And the movement was also very conscious. It's a very consciously a single cause movement that respects human emotions. People are angry. Because the system has not delivered on its promises in many ways, and people are angry, and this anger is often misdirected, or if it's not, the first source of human anger is usually some injustice that happens to people. And if this injustice is not addressed, then this anger just boils over and turns into what psychologists call the free-floating rage. And what we see a lot in politics is then you have some right-wing populists who just come and just freely redirect this free-floating rage onto immigrants or onto anything, because at this stage of attention building, it doesn't matter. People just need a release of this tension of rage, and you can redirect it. And so I think the power of the movement, of the political organizing, is to take this emotion seriously and not get discouraged at first of how people, narrate their rage, but to really work to bring it back to its original cause and work with people across many political denomination to show we do have a common purpose. There is something that unites us as humans, and in a way almost purposely ignoring all this other division and focusing on this one goal, that we don't need to agree on everything. It's enough if we agree on one thing, because this one thing is important enough to work and to change something together.
Yeah, and just that brings me nicely to another short extract from your book that really resonated with me as I read it. I'll read this out, and then maybe we can take some questions from viewers. So you say, DWE provided a structure that channeled people's anger into a legal form, the right to socialization as inscribed in Article 15. Because this form was partially empty, DWE used the energy of anger to build a campaign that fills Article 15 with meaning. In this way, DWE mobilized people's righteous anger to reclaim a constitutional right, because anger doesn't need to break the law, it can also renew it. Somewhere in this process, anger transforms into joy, A tells me she learned this from Brazil's landless workers movement. You join because of what you want to change, but you stay because of how you feel. And that message of transforming anger into hope through giving people agency, giving people the belief that they can make the system better, restore it to what it should be, I think is a really central theme in Joanna's book. So we have some questions from the audience. Celia asks about what needs to happen in Germany now to combat the rise of Alliance for Deutschland.
That's a good question, but I think housing is actually interesting, an important part of it, because well, maybe just to finish the context of a referendum, because
Yes.
I think the important thing that we did not say yet is that this project is not complete yet. So we want a referendum, and the government, well, plays on delay. They do not want to do it. And so what the movement is doing right now is organizing a second referendum. It's a bit different. I mean, so in German legal system or in Berlin legal system, you have one kind of referendum, which is, it's called a resolution referendum, where you basically order the government to legislate. But of course, I mean, you have no legal tools to force. I mean, if they delay legislation on purpose, you can like really not do much. And then there is a legislative referendum where you write the legislation and you propose it, and then if people vote yes, then it's automatically passed. Now, we didn't go for this legislative referendum in the first go because it was too early, because there were no precedents. And then if you just make a formal mistake in the legislation, then like the whole political initiative is over, despite the political success. So it was too early and the expertise was not built. Now, funnily enough, one of the delay strategy of the government was to start a commission, the formal expert commission, to investigate if and how it's possible. And even if they started a commission with very clear aim of trying to delay and deny, the commission actually confirmed it is possible. So there's way more legal expertise. And we crowdfunded 100,000 euros and paid a very renowned public law firm to write this legislation for us, and we'll be organizing a second referendum. So that's one thing. And now back to Celia's question. There is research, it's very recent academic research that shows also this rise of right-wing populism is, among others, I mean, there's many factors, but it's among others also linked to housing, because usually this kind of right-wing mobilization, they fueled by fear, by inciting fear and transforming into rage, and then directing this rage usually at some population. I mean, usually it's migrant population, right? And obviously the fear of losing home is very real and very close to skin. So if that's not addressed, then it's very easy to play this card of saying like, oh look, I mean, now, you know, the migrants are going to take your housing and your subsidies and whatever. So I think, and then coming back to politics of emotion, I think there's no way around of really seriously doing the emotional work of politics. And I think the contemporary politics, especially contemporary party politics, is very much now boiled down to presenting PR statements over the media. If you work with people's hearts, then they will also, the minds will follow. And then you can use this energy as something constructive to rebuild the system. But that's a lot of work. That's not something that you're going to do, for a PR message and cup of tweets. I mean, you really need to take people seriously. And I think a lot of, also the liberal side fears that. Also because that means you have first to take this rage. Like you will come and they'll be enraged. And again, I track it. I'll compare it to this moment of Solidarność. If you look how Solidarność started, it's this movement of 10 million people who effectively, cracked the Eastern Bloc open, being the first country to overthrow authoritarian populism. It started actually from anger being taken seriously. That's from working with people's anger, acknowledging its sources.
Yeah, and that was a big part of the reason why the liberal establishment in Britain was both happy to call the Brexit referendum and surprised to lose it, that it didn't understand how angry people were, how ignored they felt.
And even in some instances, Feder dismissed them. So in a way, fueled it Feder and to its own demise. I mean, the big difference between the Brexit referendum and our referendum is precisely that the Brexit referendum is a rage referendum, right? Like it's this pure like, okay, let's destroy the system because it has not been working for us. And there's truth to it. The system has not been working for the people. But then it's, the causes that are named are not necessarily analytically correct. I mean, what is correct is that the system is not working for the people. I mean, why and how? But what is crucially missing is, okay, how you exactly going to construct the new system is going to work better for the people, and no one really delivered it in the case of Brexit. Now, again, the power of this Berlin movement is that it takes this negative energy of anger of saying, okay, there's something deeply wrong with the system and we need to change it, and uses it to really create a very positive vision. I mean, the movement, rather than just spreading rage, it constantly produces legal documents. I mean, there is a legislation project of how socialization could happen. There's a legislation project of how this new institution that would manage this housing in a democratic way should function. How would they distribute housing, avoiding, discrimination of the housing market, how they would go about resolving conflict. So there's this constant work of designing and redesigning the new system. So it is you can call it responsible populism, right? Because it is really about daring not to say yes instead of only saying no. Yes, it is about what we don't want. We don't want the system that has been, putting us in a different position, neglecting our needs. But also, yes, we dare to imagine a new world. We dare to imagine how we want the system to function. We dare to say we don't want just, new iPhones and more followers on Instagram. We actually want good life for everyone.
Yeah. Thank you. And do you see applications from Berlin for the UK? What ought Good Law Project to do? Do you think us with our supporters, if we want to learn the lessons of Radically Legal?
Well, I mean, I think there's many different areas, right? Like in relation to housing, of course, there's there is a very basic legislation. I mean, like, again, like starting modestly, even some rent control, it's interesting. For example, this idea of contracts, like open-ended versus like 1-year lease. I mean, the part of the idea of the free market is always saying the free market needs stability of expectations. So the companies need stable property rights so that they can plan. Interestingly enough, people do need the same, right? Like if you really want to build your life, you cannot not know where you're going to live next year, and if you can still afford to live the next year, right? So if you have it for the companies, why not to have it for the people, right? Like stability of expectations, property rights, be it as a tenant, be it as an owner, right? Simple thing.
You make it all sound so simple, Jonna. I wonder why we haven't managed to do it yet. I fear that we're running out of time. I'm enormously grateful to you for joining us and to everyone who has stuck with us through the technical glitches, for which apologies. We'll make sure we do better next time. I've really enjoyed talking to you again. We met in Oxford some months back, and it's been great to learn even more about your wonderful book and that wonderful project. As I've mentioned, Joanna's book is Radically Legal Berlin Constitutes the Future. It won this extraordinary and enormously prestigious prize, the 9 Dots Prize. You won't be able to see, but there's a little 9 Dots Prize logo on the back. And it's available, obviously, from all good bookstores. And am I right that you may not need to buy it?
Yes, the book is also available open access. So the book, I mean, it's about commons, and the book is commons as well. So if you want just an ebook version, it is available on Cambridge Core. I mean, if you Google it, you can have a PDF or a Kindle version for free.
For free. And the publishers won't thank me for pointing that out, but many of our viewers will be very pleased to hear that as well. So thank you so much for all of your work. Thank you for giving us the time. Thank you for telling the story. It's been a great pleasure again, Joanna.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it a lot too, and obviously keep the Good Law Project going. I mean, it's an amazing initiative.